South African Federation of Trade Unions has concluded its business, doing so yesterday with Zwelinzima Vavi retaining his position as General Secretary. Now, during his closing address, Vavi slammed any prospect of Saftu's biggest affiliate, NUMSA, leaving the Federation. The General Secretary of Saftu, the newly elected General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi, joining me in studio now. Mr. Vavi, thank you very much for deciding to come to our studios. Let me start off with a question about whether you think you are going to see out your term of office that has just begun.
Well, we are guided by the Constitution that gives all of us a 4-year term. And unless I misconduct myself terribly, warranting the NEC to show me the door, or unless circumstances politically determine that I decide that I go elsewhere and make a contribution elsewhere, or there are circumstances beyond what we can think of today, I will stay for four years, and this ought to be my last term. I can't come back again.
Yeah.
And end up with a 15 years in the helm of one organization. If you remember, by the way, Xoli, you know this history, I would have preferred to step down at COSATU after serving 10 years. And the comrades said, you can't go anywhere. And only to find out they said that I must not go because they didn't have a unifying candidate. So I became a sacrificial lamb until the ambitions elsewhere were such that they now were willing to go against what they asked me to do, stay, and they showed me the door in the National Executive Committee. But that's history. I'm not going to make such a risk again. And this has to be the last term. And after this, I have to find my way into doing something else useful for the society.
Well, I suppose those that back your leadership of Saftu, they would want you to conclude this term of office and not end it prematurely. And the reason I'm saying these words is that I had a conversation with a former office bearer of Saftu. This is a person who was your deputy not too long ago. That's Moleko Paketi. He was here in studio yesterday, and we had this conversation. Just take a listen to what he had to say. At the heart of the disagreement, in particular issues that led to your suspension alongside the other office bearers, is money the root cause of the disagreement at leadership level here? Was money the root cause?
I would say accountability, whether it's of money or of leadership, having been entrusted with workers' money, the organization as a whole, and at a point where a question is posed for a leader to account, in line with the Constitution, which is the statute of the organization, in line with the policy, the issue get politicized to a point that it brought about a potential crisis that I believe would have been quite dire. You would appreciate that the 4 of those suspended served their entire term of office. Basically, when we were starting this federation some 6-7 years ago, we came out of a federation, some of us, in 2012. We wanted to break away with the past. We wanted to bring about change. We met with 150 or so trade unions in 2016 in a workers' summit, who agreed that there is a need for a new federation. A year later, in 2017, we launched a federation. Within the constitution of that federation, there is a particular principle. That principle is financial self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
One element of it is that we should account for each and every rent and cent of workers' money.
Mr. Vavi, that conversation, part of it, included Mr. Paketi stating that you have said publicly that any monies that were used personally or irregularly for the purpose of the federation, those monies will be refunded to the organization. did you use monies of the Federation for personal use? And if so, has that money been paid back?
Let me put it this way. Those guys, Paketi included, put an allegation during a meeting of the national office bearers that there are irregular transactions in the Saftu finances, in the card that is in my possession. And they made an example. Example number one, they said there is a 1,800 rands that have been used to purchase airtime data in Queenstown. Because I'm coming from Queenstown, they assume that I had such a big gathering of my family to to use it, to buy data for everybody in the Maikle Namaicha. And secondly, they said that there are some petrol slips, and that automatically it is irregular for the Saftu card to be used for petrol. They said that there are some other subscriptions for Google, for to boost Facebook postings and all of that. And for these 100 rand, 1,000 rand, 800, they felt it was worth to put a general secretary elected in the National Congress on suspension. He was the biggest advocate for this suspension. Investigation have now taken place after I had supplied them with the receipt to say, but this 1,800 rands you are saying I must be suspended for was actually data bought for the Saftu provincial secretaries and chairpersons of the provinces so that they can join meetings that are being held through the webinar. How could you want to put somebody on suspension for 1,800 rand when there are slips that say it was for comrade A, B, C, D? This petrol, you're saying it is so irregular, was for me, was for my protector to travel to Durban in one instance, to travel to Cape Town in the other instance. And in the process of ensuring that I have security, when I mediate the taxi wars in Cape Town, or when I go to address a congress of one of our affiliates in Durban. And you have to use toll gates, and you have to use petrol, and it's an amount of 1,000 rand or so.
Yeah.
They say that's irregular suspension. No, I want to explain this. Then, in the process, we find out that on one instance, I would have used in my account of what you call this, this thing you use now to travel around.
Okay. What, a credit card?
No. You remember all of us have an account that you can get a car in your doorstep and you go anywhere. Uber. I use the Uber that is my account. But in this instance, I was moving from the Saftu head office to the airport. So I would have then used the Saftu credit card to say it is on business. After that, I didn't realize that for 4 times, this Uber continued to use not my card, but the Saftu account, amounting to 456 rands. 4 times used by my child going to school. That's the personal expenditure they've been saying he is admitting that he have used it. Of course, I paid the 456 rand immediately after being shown that, no, look at this point, you are using your account from this point after you have gone to the airport. They are now deducting the same amounts from the Saftu Federation.
Yeah.
It's paid back. And so when you don't know the details and you hear that Vavi have admitted that he has paid back, you will think that they are talking about 456,000 rands. It's 456 rands used to go to school and mistakenly from the Saftu account instead of taking off from my account. That's what they have been telling people around, that he's corrupt, he has admitted, he has used this account, he has to go, and mobilize a lot of people into believing that indeed there should be something untoward to this.
Mr. Vavi, I'm going to try and hurry us along.
Yes,
there are other competing stories at the heart of this matter is the issue of monies. And your biggest affiliate within Saftu, NUMSA, was very clear on the conference floor. They were actually shouting this right in front of you as you sat at the top table. Is there something to be said about the use of monies, workers' monies, and the relationship, the personal relationship, which you went into some detail about yesterday between yourself and Mr. Jim, that perhaps warrants that you revisit that relationship? Just how fractured is your relationship with Mr. Jim, and do you think that that fracture of the relationship has now cascaded into the business of representing workers, or has affected the work that you're supposed to do?
In normal circumstances, there would have been no attempt to suspend me, for even if indeed I had misused a credit card or a union card to the tune of 1,800 rands. Under normal circumstances, people will say, just pay the money, let's move on. The money is so insignificant. The 456 rand is so insignificant. But there was political machinations that were going on. There was deep political disagreement, and people were now trying to use whatever issue they can lay their hands on to achieve a political agenda. There was an attempt, for example, to use this 456 rand or 1,800 airtime for provincial leadership of the Federation as an excuse to remove me before the Congress, so that I do not contest it, because I will then be suspended. That was a clear political agenda. And that agenda didn't succeed, because the overwhelming majority of the Saftu affiliates said no to that. It was an unfortunate event, because it is something that you don't do under normal circumstances. The circumstances were abnormal, and so people were wanting to use anything. In relation to the issue I was addressing yesterday of my personal relationship with the General Secretary of NUMSA, I explained that I, and I guess even him, have a responsibility to take the first step and to move forward and to address that source of tension. Because naturally, let's face it, I played a big role in pulling unions together into the Federation. And naturally, there will be people who are loyal to me even before I do anything, because of the role I played to pull everybody into that Federation. And naturally, he is the General Secretary of his union. And people will be loyal to him before they hear what are the facts, just on the basis that this is our General Secretary. And when you don't address issues between the leadership, unfortunately, when two elephants are fighting, the grass suffers. And that's a lesson that we are learning every day. And I have a responsibility to reach out, and he has a responsibility to reach out. And we're going to have to sort whatever issues that may be underlying that. But the point that the Congress was making, though, yesterday was the tensions and the difficulties that this Congress have to confront have nothing to do with the personalities between two people.
Yeah.
This is not a Congress where the whole of the unions must line themselves between two personalities. That will be a total misrepresentation of the factors of what caused the difficulties in the Congress.
Okay, all right. Now that you've cleared that, let's take a break. When we return, we continue the conversation. We are in conversation with the newly minted General Secretary of the Federation of South African Trade Unions, that's Saftu. Zwelinzima Vavi is sitting with me in studio. Mr. Vavi, just before we went on a break, you mentioned something very interesting, and that is it is your responsibility and it is Mr. Irvin Jim's responsibility to reach out to one another. At the heart of the tension between the two of you, is this a personal matter now, or does it relate to the work that you are supposed to do on behalf of workers?
There was no stage where there was a discussion between the two of us about what leads to ill feelings. I obviously hear, and I've seen reports that he has presented to the NECs and the central committees of NUMSA. So I know what are the factors. I know what are the factors. There is a factor, for example, that I would have decampaigned the SRWP in the 2019 national elections.
That's the political party that NUMSA has been wanting to be formed?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That issue has been there in writing. I've decampaigned. And I've decampaigned because when I was asked by 3 or 4 news stations as to whether Saftu will be backing the SRWP, I categorically stated then, as I still continue to state now, that Saftu have never ever decided to back any political party during the elections, and that it would have been wrong for me to come up in public and state that the Federation Saftu is now backing the SRWP.
You're going to forgive me for rushing you along. So the political party element is one matter. Is there any other matter?
There is a second matter which I have also seen in writing and heard presentations about a resolution of the Congress of Saftu that says that the Federation must build a working class mass movement. Mass movement meaning that it must unite with working class formations that are progressive, that are in the NGOs, even the political parties that are socialist orientated.
Yeah.
And the view of NUMSA resolutions has been that we shouldn't create a mass workers party, but we must back a revolutionary party. A revolutionary party in the context of what we're talking about will be some form of a committee declaring itself that it is revolutionary. Right. And it is a vanguard, and therefore it must be given the right to lead the struggles for socialism. So those are the issues that seem to be coming up in that we will have to have a discussion and discuss.
Let me ask you this, very briefly, we are out of time. When you were leaving COSATU, was there ever a time that you were personally assisted using workers' monies out of NUMSA coffers?
Yes, I was paid by NUMSA. My salaries for the time I was dismissed by COSATU, NUMSA took over through a resolution of their own central committee. And NUMSA provided me with a protector through their subscription monies. NUMSA provided me an office to operate from with their membership subscriptions to spearhead the creation of the new federation. So yes, tremendously.
And isn't that perhaps the source of the disagreement from Mr. Jim's side, that I've helped you, perhaps with the agreement of the fellow union leaders that he is leading with, but now you have failed to pay back that debt. Instead, you're betraying me.
I have had a sense from discussions that there's an expectation that because we did all of these things from our constitutional structures, you must be loyal. And loyalty means that you are answerable to us and not to the structure that have elected you in the additional Congress. there is that thing also playing itself out.
So, final analysis, therefore. Was that the right thing to do, Mr. Vavi?
Which one?
The assistance, financial assistance, using the funds of NUMSA, was that something that was agreed with the members of that union, or was this an agreement between yourself and Mr. Jim? Because this is what workers in the country are frankly upset about when it comes to unions, union leaders perhaps.
No. In this particular case, this was not some personal favor being done to me. It was NUMSA's revolutionary responsibility to defend the former General Secretary of the Federation, COSATU, who have stood very firmly in defense of the right of NUMSA members to adopt resolutions based on how they analyze the political and their circumstances of the Federation that was eating from the hands of a bourgeoisie class in the tripartite alliance arrangement. They were right to take those resolutions to say, remember I was actually dismissed from COSATU for refusing to sign a letter dismissing the 340,000 members of the Federation, for refusing. And NUMSA said that no, those who defend our right to that we have a right to convene our congresses and say we want to say A, B, C, D, cannot be suddenly be victims. And they came to the party in the Constitution. It was not an individual decision. It was a constitutional decision to say, no, we will take over the salaries, we will protect him, we will give him infrastructure to champion a creation of a new federation. And NUMSA did that, and that's why NUMSA, more than any other union in the federation, was often mentioned as not just a pioneer for the creation of Saftu, but for the people who did most of the sacrifices to ensure that the federation exists.
Mr. Vavi, I did mention that there are so many competing stories on this day. I sincerely wish that I can bring you back here, because there's lots to discuss, in particular about the new direction now that this federation is going to take, taking into account what you have just been candid about here. And we thank you for being very honest with us.
I never lie anyway. Under no circumstances will I tell anybody something that I know is not the truth.
I appreciate your time this morning. General Secretary of Saftu, Zwelinzima Vavi.